10 seconds pushing buttons. Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of The Bullet. My name is Paul Lathrop. I'm the Deputy Director of New Media for the Second Amendment Foundation. Joining me today, it is my honor to bring a man that has killed me twice. When I attended the Firearms Academy of Seattle's active shooter interdiction course a few years ago, Marty Hayes, when we did my brain isn't working so well. When we did the simulated fire portion of the training, Marty Hayes twice killed me, and I learned something from it. More importantly, Marty's been in law enforcement and training for more than 30 years, and when the opportunity came up to bring Marty up and in here as Tom is out at Gunsite learning and having fun this week, I thought this would be absolutely a perfect opportunity to introduce y'all to Marty. Marty, thanks for coming along today, man.
You're welcome, and thank you for letting me come on and share maybe a little bit of my knowledge with your people.
Very cool. As we get started, I want to mention to everybody, if you're watching us live on the Polite Society podcast feeds, either YouTube or Facebook, you can comment on the live video. We'll get your comments up. We'll discuss them on the air. If you are watching anywhere else on OpsLens or anywhere that picks us up, go to Twitter, tweet with the hashtag #TheBullet. And it's safe now because Elon Musk owns it. So, supposedly it's neutral. But go to Twitter, tweet with the hashtag #TheBullet. We'll get those just as quickly. And if you catch us while we're still live, we'll get those comments up as well. Marty, what we wanted to talk about today, you've been around, 30 years more in the training industry. You started in the 80s with training. Wanted to talk a little bit about how things have changed. I would imagine one of the things that have changed in training since you started training and training people is the guns. It seems like there's a lot of high-tech stuff around now. Not so much when you started, I'm guessing.
Yeah, it was a revolver world back then. I'm talking late 70s, early 80s. I got my start in this business in law enforcement. And then after a few years of working nights and weekends, I thought, if I don't get out now, I will spend all of my life working nights and weekends and holidays, and that made me pretty grouchy. So I decided to take my retirement all out of the middle, knowing that I could always go back into law enforcement. And so I basically dropped out full-time, played around in it part-time, and as I said, the rest was history. I got involved in the firearms training aspect of it as a cop, and then I segued into competition and that was in the early to mid-'80s, and the competition was NRA PPC competition, police pistol combat. And then in the 80s, I ended up taking my first job as a private industry firearms instructor, one of the first really in the country to be working at it full time. There was indoor gun range opened up in Seattle, and I went up there and convinced them that I was their guy to run the range and to do the training for them. And so that happened in 1988, and up until about a year ago, I was doing it full time, and I'm very happy to be retired from training now after 30 plus years, and sold the business, the Firearms Academy of Seattle, to one of my instructors, and I'm able to just concentrate now on the Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network.
Well, I'm going to say, let me plug a little bit for that instructor. Belle McCormick, the instructor that bought it, I've known Belle for a while. She's a thoroughly capable instructor, and I have the greatest respect for her. I am fairly certain she's going to do great things with the Firearms Academy of Seattle, and I plan on going back there myself in the not too distant future.
Yeah, she's been doing good. She actually ran the business for the year previous to taking over full time as an owner this year, and we haven't missed a beat. She's still doing as many classes. In fact, I think even more now, and everything is just perking right along. She's doing great.
All right, so you mentioned as we started that in the 80s, the firearms that you seen in training were predominantly, I think that you said possibly 75% were revolvers. Semi-autos, not so much. And now, at least in my experience, when I go to training, it's rare to see a revolver. It's I would say less than 10%.
Yeah, I would agree with that. In fact, I'd almost say, yeah, maybe 5%. Out of a class of 20 people, one might have a revolver, but it's not unusual to see them all with semi-automatics. And in fact, now we basically are looking at how many of them are running single-action 1911s versus the the polymer wonder guns.
Sure.
But it's interesting though, because the first few years I taught, I basically taught new shooters who had never really carried a gun before or never really shot, and they were dragging the guns out of their house to come to class. A lot of them were heirloom type guns, old revolvers, and a few old semi-automatics. I remember at Ortgies in class, and we had a lot of PPKs, PPKSs, SIG P230, which I think is still like one of the most sexiest guns in the world. But boy, that sucker recalled for a 380. And when the small Wonder 9 started, well, actually when the Glock 19, that really changed the paradigm, because there was a concealable millimeter pistol that easy to shoot and very reliable. And of course, that one pistol, in fact, for 20 plus years, somebody calls me up and tells me, Marty, what gun should I get for self-defense? I say Glock 19.
Yeah.
Get that one, start with it, learn, and then as you learn more about this stuff, you might switch over to a different gun, but a Glock 19 will be the gun to begin with.
Yeah, I still have. I mean, we have a lot of other guns besides a Glock 19, but Susan and I still own a Glock 19 here. Glock was my very first carry gun, and I started 10 years ago, and so I'm anymore. Yeah, I'm right there with you. Get the Glock reliability. It even goes beyond what. Quite often, when you hear somebody really old giving advice, really old being me or older, you'll hear them saying, "Well, get a revolver. That's 6 for sure." Well, Glock is right there. There's not much that's going to go wrong with a Glock, if you ask me. I've put mine through torture tests, not cleaned it for an entire year, and only at the end of shooting it a lot did it finally start to exhibit problems.
Of course, one of the early issues we had in firearms training when people started changing over to the semi-automatic was the ammunition availability. It just wasn't that great in 9mm. Yeah, we had good functioning rounds, but as we know, the FBI had a problem with it when they got into their mid-'80s shootout in Miami, which made them switch to the 10mm for a while. And then when that proved to be too difficult to shoot well, they ended up switching to the new 40 caliber. and that took over police use and a lot of armed citizens use too. Because face it, the armed citizens go in the direction that the police are already going,
Mm-hmm.
and so they followed along. And I would say, if not a majority, at least a it was hanging there even with the 9mm. But now, when the police basically broke all their guns, wore out their guns shooting 40, and they had to replace them, by that time, the 9mm pistol cartridges had made a great leaps and bounds in serviceability and stopping power. And so now the game has changed back to 9mm almost all the time.
Sure. Well, let's talk a little bit about, in the very old, in literature from the 50s and 60s, you see shooting is one hand in the pocket, the other hand, the dominant hand, holding out a firearm at arm's length and doing target shooting. I imagine by the 1980s that was pretty much gone or on the way out. What was the predominant style of shooting that you started training?
Yeah, thankfully I missed that part of the industry, that part of the training, the NRA one-handed bullseye competition. It had been replaced in the law enforcement world. Remember, that's where I came from, was the law enforcement world. It was replaced with NRA PPC shooting, police pistol combat. And in that competition, the police officers all bought custom-tuned PPC revolvers, 6-inch, primarily Smith & Wesson revolvers with big, heavy bull barrels on them, and they weighed a ton. And so in order to shoot them effectively standing, you had to stand basically on your 2 feet, facing the target, and sticking your arm straight out. And then most people would lean back a little bit to counteract the weight of the revolver. And that was the style that basically came into vogue when I started in this business. And of course, that's what I knew. So when I started teaching in the late 80s, that basically is what I taught.
All right, and so let's talk about the transition then, because now it's predominantly a lot of my training is from the Masada Yub group style of training. I've taken a lot of courses with Masada Yub, and that is almost a what am I trying to say, a martial arts stance with your feet, wide base with one foot facing your attacker, the other one back and to the side. When did that transition happen?
Well, I first trained with Mass back in 1990, and I was also quite enamored with him and his ability to teach and the style that he was teaching. And so when we saw him teaching isosceles, but in an aggressive forward stance type isosceles, it seemed to me like that made a whole lot of sense. So that's when I started teaching it. And of course, at the same time, Jeff Cooper had started Gunsite and was teaching his version of the Weaver stance, and that was gaining popularity a lot in police circles. So in the 1980s, the industry basically grew up pushing into shooting a Weaver stance, which was primarily a bladed stance, push-pull, and mostly with 1911 style pistols. And so you had really the two predominant ones was the aggressive isosceles, not the PPC competition type, but an aggressive forward stance. much more than what there is now, by the way. I know if you took my hand here and you held it straight up, if you leaned it forward, that would be probably the way people are teaching now. He was even leaning more forward, as you will remember. And so it helped control the recoil of the different guns very effectively, where the Weaver stance, you're basically standing on your 2 feet and you're pushing your arm out and pulling your gun back, and your feet were staggered, and that push-pull helped control the recoil. And so it was all about managing and controlling the recoil with those two different philosophies.
We're getting some comments coming in. For some reason, Facebook isn't populating into my software, but Charlie Chambers over on the Facebook side says he's a big fan. He's glad to see you on the show. Over on the YouTube side, I do have one that I'm going to put on the screen here. Gun Websites wants to know, speaking of trends and evolution of gun tech, are red dots on pistols here to stay? Or, I know you tried red dots here recently. What's your thought, Marty?
I tried red dots back in the early 1990s. I still have a couple pistols that I mounted up red dot, and that's when I was shooting an IPSC competition, because the guns that were winning IPSC at the time, they were mounting red dots on them. And I said, well, I want to try that. And so I got myself a mount for my Glock 17L, and I got a Pro Point, I think, red dot, and I tried it, and I didn't like it because when I brought the gun up to my eye, it's used to coming up behind the sights, and that dot was about an inch higher than the sights. And so I just looked around trying to find the dot, and I flushed that very, very quickly. I said, well, that's the last time I'm going to lose a match because of that dumb red dot. And then now, to answer the person's question, the red dots have evolved to the point where they're mounted very low on the gun, and I do think they're here to stay. I don't think we're going to go backwards. I don't particularly use them for myself, but I certainly don't have any heartburn with anyone else using them.
All right. I on a personal note, since I had my stroke, I had the opportunity to shoot a friend when I was down on my way to Florida. I stopped by to see a friend in Tennessee, Miguel Gonzalez of the Gun Free Zone blog fame, and I had an opportunity to shoot his handgun that had a laser grip on it. And I found I shot that gun as well after my stroke as I remembered shooting my gun before my stroke. And so I have gone to a laser grip or a laser guard on my carry gun. I've heard a lot of people say they slow you down. I don't know that that's the case. I'm looking forward to going through some real world training with it to see how I perform.
Yeah, we experimented with the lasers quite a bit back around the turn of the century. I guess it was the turn of the century.
Around 2000.
Back around 2000. We were only 90 minutes away from Crimson Trace, and one of our instructors, Clyde Caceres, at the time for Crimson Trace, he came up to class one day and he was showing me the laser, and I said, "Yeah, right. I don't need a laser." And he said, "Let's go in the low light room and see if you need a laser." And so he and I set up a little competition, and he smoked my ass. And I'm thinking, okay, if he can do this to me, then I need a laser. And so I gave him my gun that day and says, "Go get a laser on it, and let me start working with it." I was one of the first persons in the country to, instructors that did this full time, to actually grasp the concept and start promoting it.
What I like about when I dry fire now, I don't need to go to a cert gun. I don't need to go to I can use my regular carry gun that has the laser guard on it. The trigger is the laser attaches to the trigger guard, and as I do my dry fire, I can see if I'm pulling or if I'm manipulating the firearm in a way I shouldn't be. I don't need a special anything to tell me that. So, one more question.
Yeah, what's basically the laser is almost gone by the wayside, and what's killing the laser off is the red dot.
Hmm. Yeah.
Because the problem, the red dot, you can shoot say 50 yards and beyond and be accurate. The laser just runs out of usefulness probably around 15 to 20 yards. You just don't see the dot on target.
The Crimson Trace makes a green laser that is effective a little farther out, but yeah, it's not unlimited. Let me get.
In fact, it's one of the reasons why I think Crimson Trace has jumped into the red dot market. I've got one of the Crimson Trace red dots right now, and I don't have it on a gun yet, but I'm going to put it on one of these guns one of these days and give it a good try.
I've got another question here from Gun Websites. He wants to know, in your opinion, what influences changes in CCW firearms training more? Laws, competition shooting, real-world situations, advances in gun technology, or something else?
Well, what influences CCW training is the instructors. And the instructors are so much more skilled and competent now. We started out back when I was training, you basically had two ways to go. You were either a law enforcement firearms instructor, which I was, and that's where I made my claim to fame in telling people that I can teach you how to shoot because I am a police firearms instructor hereby certified by the state of Washington. And if you didn't have that, though, basically you could be an NRA certified instructor. And back then, the NRA instruction was pretty bare bones, pretty remote. It was leap or sell sitting at a table shooting off of a sandbag for their instruction. And in fact, when I took a law enforcement NRA instructor course back then, and that's what they had us doing still, was shooting off a sandbag sitting at a table. And but that's changed, and they're doing a pretty good program. They have evolved, and so now the quality of instructors out there is so much greater, and that's what's really affecting the change in CCW training. I don't think it's being driven by the new equipment and stuff. It's really the quality of instructors, and there's a lot of them out there now teaching.
Sure. Looking for we're pretty much caught up on comments. If we could, one other thing I want to bring up, and we just barely mentioned it, and that's Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network. You are the leader. You're the president of ACLDN. ACLDN and Firearms Academy of Seattle, of course, two different entities. But I've promoted ACLDN for a very long time. Proud to be associated with you folks. If I could, real quick, could I just have you? We've got about 7 minutes left, just a little less than. Give your quick elevator speech on why anybody that owns a firearm for self-defense needs to be a member of ACLDN.
Well, they don't need to be if they're not afraid of going to jail because they didn't have a good legal team behind them. And that's pretty much the reason for us existing, is to be able to help them defend their actions in a court of law. Of course, to defend their actions in a court of law, they must have a good legal team, which consists of attorneys, experts, advisors, perhaps being bailed out, that kind of thing. And that's where money talks, and it's always been our goal to have plenty of money there to help any of our members. We've put over $350 million in our legal defense fund, and so I'm not worried about that running out of money. But in order to also defend those members best, we have a legal education component that people need to know what's in that material. They need to be able to talk intelligently about pre-attack indicators and what the castle doctrine is, and a whole myriad of other things that that go into armed citizen self-defense. And if they can talk cogently, intelligently about these things, these topics that they were trained on, it's much less likely that they're even going to be prosecuted, because early on, your attorney will likely explain to the prosecutor that not your typical armed citizen. This person is well educated, well trained, and frankly, they've got a financial backing that they don't have to rely upon the public defender's office. They're going to be able to basically take how much ever money they need and defend this.
Yeah, it's
Having said that, we've never had one of our people go to trial. We've had over 30 people involved in incidents, but they were all dropped before trial, or the member had made a couple mistakes, not major ones, but a couple minor ones, to where it was logical for them to take a very low-level plea bargain and get the thing to go away. And so
sure.
We're very fortunate. One of the companies out there advertises, "We've defended a murder claim." Well, we haven't, because none of our people have been involved in a murder incident.
Well, and that's one thing I want to point out. This is one of the things that is often when the negative or the anti shout about this. Well, that's murder insurance. No, it's absolutely not, because you're not going. Even if you're a member of ACLDN, if you go out and just decide to shoot somebody for no reason, ACLDN is not going to defend you. You have to be defending you. It has to be a good shoot, so to speak. You can't just go off and do something, and ACLDN will defend you.
Yeah, before we plop down $250,000 for complete legal defense, we're going to go through the facts of the case. We're going to make a determination: is it reasonably likely that a good self-defense incident? Did the member do anything egregious that caused this incident to occur? Thankfully, none of ours have. And again, that's the educational component. They don't screw up for the most part, because they don't, because they understand the laws.
Yeah, we're getting, again, my software still isn't picking up Facebook. Charlie Chambers over on the Facebook side says that he joined in 2017. His attorney in Kingston, North Carolina has joined ACLDN, law offices of Alan C. Foster. So, very cool. On our way, is there anything I've forgotten to bring up that you wanted to talk about today? We just got about a minute left, Marty.
Oh my God, we just started.
I know.
No, I think that, I am just grateful to have been involved in an industry where I could help facilitate the advancement of that state of the art. I mean, when I started, basically it was NRA PPC shooting, and I was able to ride that wave all the way up to now, where we're doing stuff like active shooter interdiction courses and a lot of role play, simunitions type stuff, and it's been a blast.
I want to get one more comment in here. Speaking of ACLDN, Robert wants to know from the YouTube side, are you available in the People's Republic of New Jersey?
We are, Robert. Our only problem is with the state of Washington. Coincidentally, that's where we reside. They call us insurance, but they have an anti-gun insurance commissioner, and they were actually successfully able to get a court decision in local superior court saying that, yeah, your insurance, well, we're appealing that now. We very much hope and expect to win that appeal. But all the other insurance commissions and people throughout the country realize that we're not insurance. And so we don't have to worry about California or New Jersey or New York or any of these other states that are shutting down the insurance carriers because they're not licensed to sell insurance.
All right. Well, Marty, we are going to set it aside there. Thank you so much for coming in today, man.
You're very welcome. It went by way too soon. If you need me to come back anytime Tom can't make it, I'm your guy.
All righty. Folks, we are going to shut it down here. I do want to ask everybody to come join me at noon Central Time tomorrow for the weekend edition of The Bullet, and I'm getting my calendar pulled up here so my brain can remember who is going to be on with me. Tomorrow is going to be Rob Morse, Alex Uli to cover the legal end of the spectrum, and Mike Piwowarski will be the commentators tomorrow, noon Central Time, for the 1 hour weekend edition of The Bullet. Thanks for watching, everybody, and we will see you next time.